Antonio Pierce was fired by the Las Vegas Raiders after one season. I'm going to tell you why he got screwed on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready. Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today as I am every Wednesday by Locked On NFL expert, the brain, Luke Braun. On today's episode, Luke is going to tell you why the Dolphins should have fired somebody. I'm going to tell you why the Tennessee Titans are an outright disaster, but we are going to start with the Las Vegas Raiders firing Antonio Pierce after one season as head coach, or we could say 1.5 after the interim experience earlier before that in the season before. But either way, fire, and a little bit of ice as well on today's
And that's
episode.
just the weather.
That is just the weather indeed. Before we continue, though, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $200 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Luke, we got another head coach firing. It didn't come on Black Monday. The Raiders had to wait one extra day for that for some reason, but my guy
Make
Q
him do a quick
from,
press conference. Had to do the Eberflus thing. They're looking at what's going on in Chicago and being like, yeah, that's the model.
Okay, I'll follow that one. But my guy Q from Locked On Raiders broke down the big news.
What's happening? It's Q Myers from the Locked On Raiders podcast with the breaking news of head coach Antonio Pierce relieved of his duties by the Silver and Black. It took a little bit longer than a lot of people expected. Looked like Antonio Pierce might be safe, but after conversations and a little bit of deliberation, Mark Davis, Tom Brady, and everyone else that has a factor and plays a role in the conversation decided it was better to move on from the head coach after 1 year. So Antonio Pierce is out. GM Tom Telesco is still in. He seems to be safe after doing a really good job with the draft the first year with the Silver and Black. So there's going to be a lot of changes in Las Vegas. Another head coach coming into the mix. So consistency is not a word that is tied together with the Raiders right now, but they're going to look to find their next head coach and hope to be able to establish that consistency for the long term. We'll see how that all plays out, but the Raiders are now officially looking for their next head football coach. For all this and a whole lot more, all things Silver and Black, tune in to the Locked On Raiders podcast.
Luke, I missed a valuable opportunity to go with Silver and Black Tuesday with Antonio Pierce getting fired.
You got there.
It's on me, I guess. As they say in the scouting community, you're not wrong. You were early. All right. But
yeah, much like the Raiders, better late than never.
Yeah, no doubt about that. But with this move, I guess where I go to and where I've been when talking about the Raiders for quite some time is you went into the season with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell as the two options at quarterback. I know that Antonio Pierce had his issues during the season, and I know that Raiders fans are, there's a lot of them out there who are for this move based on what they saw. But at the end of the day, you go into a situation like that with those quarterbacks, and I am hard-pressed to find a head coach in their first year who would have success with that. So I just feel like he got screwed here. Antonio Pierce wasn't given a real opportunity to have a winning season because he wasn't given a real group of quarterbacks. And I feel like me and you have these discussions all the time of culpability and behind the scenes and like who is actually responsible and who deserves the blame. We don't know how on board Antonio Pierce was, but I have a hard time believing in Antonio Pierce's true heart. He was comfortable with those quarterbacks to go through this season. There's just no way you could fire a guy when his quarterback situation is that.
I don't know where the Raiders go from here. It feels like they've just been like listlessly floating through outer space for like 3 years, just doing nothing. They passed up on several opportunities to draft quarterbacks. They passed up on opportunities to sign quarterbacks when one's hit free agency. They it does feel like they've sort of just like drifted out to sea, and I don't know where they are now, and I don't know what the plan was supposed to be with Antonio Pierce. And maybe that is the problem with Antonio Pierce. What does success look like for the Raiders? I don't know if anybody went into that season thinking the Raiders were going to make the playoffs or anything like that. But what would success have looked like? Did the locker room still believe in Antonio Pierce? You do this interim thing, and the Raiders really rallied around him last year, and that's why he got that job. But I don't know if that remained true. And maybe that's the thing that kind of went, maybe this guy isn't actually, the rah-rah, the Dan Campbell type we think we're getting anymore. Maybe that's the case. I'm definitely with you if it was, this year just simply wasn't good enough. We got to fire the coach over it. Well, that's insane. What did you think was going to happen?
Right.
I don't know if that definitely should not have been the definition of success. I don't know what it was in Vegas. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there was a lower definition of success that Antonio Pierce still didn't meet.
I mean, that's what the Raiders are going to tell us, and that's what they are telling us with this move. But really, I just look back, while you were talking, it made me think of all the stuff from Mike Mayock, John Gruden, ousting, and how ugly that was. Henry Ruggs' situation, the way they treated Derek Carr on the way out and how they sat him early, which we've seen more now in the last few years. But, that's a guy who meant something.
The way they treated Oakland fans when they moved. I mean, this franchise is completely alone in the wilderness right now. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you can be a Raiders fan and feel any semblance of loyalty, and I don't think that they deserve that from you.
And here's the sad reality, too. I think, and I thought throughout most of the year when it looked like the Raiders were going to be set up for a top 2 pick, I thought, man, you got the Tom Brady connection with Shedeur Sanders. Say whatever you want about Shedeur Sanders as a prospect, as a media entity and an entertainment factor. He's a lightning rod. He can charge up a fan base.
You can be the Cowboys of the AFC. Congratulations. You can be more about flash than substance.
I think they'd love to be the Cowboys of the AFC, quite honestly. So for me, because the Cowboys, we joke about the Cowboys, but the Cowboys do have winning seasons. The Cowboys make the playoffs.
Yeah, they give you something for the price of admission.
More than the Raiders. But seeing, again, the Ruggs situation, Gruden's ousting, moving the team, I think about Clelin Ferrell, Tyree Wilson. Is he going to turn things around? Now Max Crosby is constantly having to answer questions about whether he wants to be somewhere else. Devontae Adams forces his way out. It's all just so ugly. They need some stability, and they got a hit on whoever they decide to hire as a head coach. I think GM Tom Telesco can put some talent on a roster, but they got to nail this head coaching situation.
Yeah, and maybe that's Brady. I think about Brady and the connections and the guys like Vrabel and Brian Flores that are on the market right now that Brady knows very well. That could lead that to the Raiders to kind of go, hey, let's try to rebuild the Patriot way here. And whatever it is, whether it's that or something else, Raiders, you need a plan. The Raiders haven't had a plan. They've just kind of been rolling with whatever comes along. Ooh, there's a hot coordinator on the market. Ooh, there's, a guy like McDaniels or John Gruden, that maybe that'll work out better this time. Maybe this interim guy that the players seem to like, maybe he's the guy. And it kind of just seems like they're taking whatever piece of candy gets put in front of them. No, come up with a plan, an idea. Hey, let's get a guy with this kind of culture. Let's get a guy with this kind of scheme, with this, and then get players for that scheme. Build something with a purpose, have the patience to see that rebuild out, because you are deep, deep, deep in rebuild hell right now. Have the patience to see that out, and maybe you can turn the Raiders into a franchise that is worth something. But here's what I'll say. I talk about the old AFC East with Brady all the time, and the Raiders are in the same boat as those Dolphins and Jets and Bills teams were. You cannot win the division because of the Chiefs. Yeah. And so whatever build happens, you're kind of going to have to, if you want to see it through, you're kind of going to have to admit 3 to 4 years, you might not get a division title, and you might still have to define success by being able to be like a scrappy wild card team that maybe makes a run. And that might have to be the goal, or you become the team that you do like what the Chargers did and say, hey, let's bring in this guy that can beat that can upend the gigantor rival and see if we can't actually unseat the Chiefs. But I do think you have to look at where you're at in that division and try not to get caught in that same hell that the Dolphins got caught in 2010.
Yeah, it's a hell that I think the Tennessee Titans might be caught in right now, whether they have a Brady in the division or not, because of just how bad they are as a franchise. And more news, Ran Carthon, Titans general manager, fired on Tuesday. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays. Of course, they have the money lines, the spreads, the over-unders, player props, and so much more. Make sure that you check out FanDuel. Looking this weekend at some possible line action. I think maybe the Denver Broncos might be able to cover there. But either way, make sure that you visit FanDuel.com and join today. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Luke, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talked about Antonio Pierce being fired by the Las Vegas Raiders after one season as head coach. Now we have to go to another firing on the day. Big time, the Titans fire their general manager, Ran Carthon, after 2 seasons. Luke, I just want to say this. Spend a lot of time on the Locked On NFL podcast trying actively to avoid talking about the Titans. This isn't Locked On Titans. If you want that, you can go check out my show any day of the week. But
I will be
the reality is, once a year, it's probably time for a State of the Union. It's probably time for me to address
I need you to make this make sense to me. I don't get it at all. I look at the two drafts that Carthon had. I think they are turning out pretty nice. And I don't really know what else he's being judged on. This is insane to me. Please explain.
That is something that's going to be hard to do, is to make sense of this. I can't promise that, but I can give you information. So let me just say, without all the preamble, Tennessee Titans fire Ran Carthon. And what is coming out now is essentially Ran Carthon was never a true general manager in the sense of what you think. And I think for the Titans and for other teams around the NFL, if you look at their power structure, the title of general manager may not be what we thought it was 5-10 years ago. For the Titans, they have Chad Brinker. Chad Brinker is the president of football operations, which is a role that has become more and more popular in the NFL, the president of football operations. So what I want people to understand is, when the Titans say that they are firing Ran Carthon as general manager and they are looking to hire a new general manager, that does not mean that the person that's being fired and will be hired is the main person in charge. Chad Brinker is at the top of the food chain for the Tennessee Titans. He's a former Green Bay executive, ton of experience with salary cap management. He's got his own IP models that he has patented himself for injury prevention and salary cap management. And he is a qualified person, but the Titans didn't fire the most important person in their organization who makes all the decisions about everything. They fired somebody who they see as just like run the draft, run free agency, get information. It's very confusing, Luke, and I see you looking at me with a confusing look.
What's the difference?
Correct. The organizational structure of the Tennessee Titans is confusing. They had Chad Brinker and Ran Carthon as equals. What they've done today is fire Ran Carthon and give Chad Brinker the ultimate power. So when the Titans say
so they're
they need to hire, they need to hire a general manager, what you really should think of that is the Titans are hiring an assistant general manager. And what you think of when you think of general manager, that is the president of football operations for the Titans. And quite honestly, Luke, I think this is something that we're going to see more and more and more in the NFL. The responsibilities are essentially what we think of when we think of general manager and assistant general manager, but the titles have just fancified in a way to where the general manager is the president of football operations and the general manager is now really the assistant general manager. And that's what the Tennessee Titans are going to look to do. And it sounds super complicated and convoluted because it is. And that is why the Tennessee
Titans. Weird titling, I guess. Like, you can call it whatever you want, I guess. As long as it's like, as long as there is a clear delineation of responsibilities and we aren't all stepping on each other's toes.
And that's the problem. And that's, it feels like that's what the Titans are finally trying to create, but here is why it's so confusing. You fire Mike Vrabel, and you do that because he doesn't want to work with Ran Carthon, the general manager. Okay? The collaboration is the buzzword. Mike Vrabel doesn't want to collaborate with Ran Carthon. Okay, great. And then you hire Brian Callahan, and you say that Brian Callahan and Ran Carthon are a perfect fit. They work so well together. Their chemistry was incredible. They didn't want to let Callahan out of the building because he worked so well with Ran Carthon. And then you fire Ran Carthon a year later, who you just fired Mike Vrabel for and hired Brian Callahan for, but now you're saying that you don't want him around. It just doesn't make any sense because nobody wants to make the decisions in Tennessee. Mike Vrabel wanted somebody above Ran Carthon who had the final say on things. Someone has to have the final say. And once Mike Vrabel was fired, everybody was like, no, we're going to make collaborative decisions and no one has the final. No, that's not how it works. Julius Caesar told us this. Every single aspect of running a company tells us this. There has to be one person at the end of the day who the buck stops with, who makes the final decision. You can pretend that it's collaborative all you want, but at some point in every single structure of group activity, one person at the end has the final say, whether you mean it for that way or you don't mean it. That's how it works. That's the simplest way to do it. So the Titans are trying to do what Mike Vrabel was asking them to do. They just did it a year later after they already fired Mike Vrabel. And yes, it's confusing. Yes, it doesn't make sense. And that's why the Tennessee Titans remain a disaster.
Okay. That makes some sense to me, that they are trying to consolidate what was a very confusing and sort of off power structure. Okay.
Power structure, yes.
Yeah, clean up the power structure. They're going to name it weird stuff. That's not really a big deal. All right, sure. But my follow-up question then is, what about the last 2 years of the Titans in terms of roster building and team management, not necessarily coaching? Are they, like, what is the thing that they're saying, we don't want any more of this? I think the drafting has been fine. Is there a free agency issue?
Well,
is it pro scouting? Like, what don't they like about the way the Titans are put together? And how is this the answer to it?
It's none of those things. It's office politics that they don't like. Reports have come out for the Titans that Ran Carthon would nap on the plane after games rather than watching tape. Members of the organization didn't feel like he was completely locked in. The Titans came out.
So this is a personal, like, this guy's not doing the job.
The Titans came out and made a statement and say they want someone that's all ball all the time, that eats, sleeps, and breathes football, and that blah, blah, blah. And they're calling it out. Basically, if you read all of the reports of what came out, they basically are saying that Ran Carthon didn't work hard enough and that he was based on relationships, but he wasn't as good with relationships as everyone made it seem. And there were people who weren't fans and didn't buy what he was selling and all of that. So they basically scapegoated it out to, we didn't trust Ran Carthon to work hard enough to do the job right. And we're going to go with a guy who Ran Carthon hired in Chad Brinker and make him the top of the mountain for the organization and let go of you. It is a Game of Thrones snake behind your back power structure
depending
battle.
on what's true.
It's been going on for years.
I'm going to be honest. I get it then. That all makes sense to me, assuming it's all true. If they're just like lying because they're pushing a guy out that they don't like, that's a worse problem. But if that's true, like, that is, man, if you're the general manager and you're like not getting as many hours as everybody else, that puts your team at a disadvantage, and you want to get a better, and maybe they like, what's the other guy, Chad Brisker? Like, okay, sure.
Brinker,
I totally get the vision, honestly. It as weird as it is, as a move, that makes way more sense to me than it did 10 minutes ago.
In theory, Luke, they're cleaning up their power structure. They're identifying this is the person at the top who makes decisions. They are getting away from someone who they didn't think would put in the work to set them up for success. In theory, it sounds like a good move, and that's probably the logic of why they made the move. But in practice, you look at Peter Skoronski, J.C. Latham, Jarvis Brownlee Jr., Tajay Spears, bringing in Tony Pollard, bringing in Calvin Ridley. Like, Tavondre Sweat. Ran Carthon wasn't great, but he made enough moves to where it didn't
feels like a whole bunch of hits for 2 years. That's a lot.
Fired, you know what I mean, for the
Yeah.
mistakes he made. So it is a very confusing and embarrassing situation in Tennessee. But they did make a move, and change could be for the better. There are some teams that didn't make a change and didn't make a move that Luke maybe doesn't agree with. We'll get into that. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of the football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, whether you're looking for a flex play or to boost your payout. You want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving Prize Picks. I've been playing for a while now, and it's a blast. You could look at like Josh Allen, more than 230 passing yards, maybe Saquon Barkley, more than 1 touchdown. It's so easy to use. I love how fast the payouts are, and it's easy. You can make your picks in as little as, or you can get paid in as little as 15 minutes. Here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today. Use the code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize I was paying for, and Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for my finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even goals that you want to hit this year. It's why Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions. For me, one of the best features is that subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. You can cancel unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. All right, Luke, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the Las Vegas Raiders situation with Antonio Pierce being fired, how the Titans are a complete disaster because of how confusing their situation is. But now let's talk about some teams who maybe should have made moves that didn't. Before we do, make sure you check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL, especially this time of year with all the breaking news constantly happening. You want to make sure that you're caught up to date all the time. So get your morning news with me and your afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop later on today. But, Luke, we talked about some teams that we think should have made some moves. I mentioned the Giants yesterday. I know you're on board with that as well, but the Miami Dolphins were a team that I didn't mention, and it kind of caught me off guard. My guy Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins, I think he might be in agreement with you.
Fresh off of an 8-9 season in which the team did not meet expectations. I think it's very comfortable to say the expectations you had at this time last year for this upcoming season and all throughout the offseason and the summertime, they fell short of everyone's expectations that follows and roots for this football team. It's a disappointing year. And anytime you fall short on expectations, things get put under the microscope.
So, Luke, as our resident brain, I want you to throw on your lab coat, grab your microscope. What do you see with the Miami Dolphins after their disappointing season?
I think they've overestimated themselves. And I think that's kind of where Kyle is at. Like, the expectations were sky high.
Right.
And I think that came off of what happened in 2023, where they started out so hot. They had that 70 burger, they seemed like they were genuinely the power of the AFC for a while. It kind of reminds me, Dolphins fans aren't going to like this, of the Cardinals a few years ago in 2021, when they started so hot, then they kind of got figured out scheme-wise, fell off, and they didn't really have the backbone of culture to continue being the contender we thought they were. And then everybody was out the building within 2 years, and they're in a totally different build now. I kind of feel like the same thing is headed there in Miami. It was 8-9 is not a fireable season to me. There are lots and lots of teams that are in way worse spots than the Miami Dolphins. You'd much rather be in the Miami Dolphins spot right now than you would be in the Giants or the Raiders or the Bears or any of these teams with clear dysfunction and all these problems. But I think the Miami Dolphins approach we've had 3 years of this McDaniel experiment now. Let's have, all the speed in the world, the scheme that he runs. It was all the rage a little while ago. And I think we've seen what it is capable of. And that is not consistent. Maybe that's a Tua problem. Maybe that's a McDaniel problem. Maybe it's some problem with all of it. They're starting to get issues in the locker room with Tyreek Hill. They've got players saying, what do we need to do to turn around next year? Well, it starts with Mike and kind of calling out the coach. That's not great. That's the same kind of quotes we were hearing from Chicago earlier this year, and that ended up in that firing. I think the Dolphins had to choose between being a year early and a year late here, and they've chosen to be a year late. But that doesn't mean it can't turn around. I mean, nothing can't turn around, right? We've seen Tua Tagovailoa be a great quarterback, but we haven't seen him be a great quarterback for 17 games. We've seen him go into cold weather into Lambeau and have that game 3 or 4 times a year. You cannot do that and expect to be the Super Bowl contender. So to me, the Dolphins appear to be very committed, and they're not changing anything about the way anything works. They might oust a position coach and as a sacrificial lamb or something like that, but they're keeping Chris Greer on, they're keeping McDaniel on, they're keeping that entire structure and saying, let's run it back and hope we get healthier next year or something like that. And it just feels like they're careening toward another 9-8, and maybe you're looking at tiebreakers. It feels like they're just destined to be in the hunt graphic and no higher than that. That doesn't contend with the Bills. That doesn't go into cold weather and play really well. And guess what? All 3 of your divisional opponents play outside in the cold weather. You got to be better about that. You've got to shake those things, and being the speedy deep ball team doesn't necessarily lend itself to that consistency. That means if your quarterback is off because his hand is cold, you suck today. And it's the NFL. You don't get to have off days. Off days are not allowed in the NFL. You got to play hard. You got to play 17 good ones. And the Dolphins, 3 years in a row now, have not been able to play 17 good ones. And they don't have so much as a playoff win to show for it.
Well, Luke, I think you went to the perfect spot. We started before the show talking about weather. It's really, really cold where I'm at. It's a bit warm and windy where you're at. And we will finish with weather as well. The reason for the inconsistency of the Miami Dolphins is they built a team that doesn't travel. Their style of play doesn't travel. You're not going to win with speed consistently when it's frigid outside and it's 20 degrees in Kansas City. You're not going to win with speed. There are some, I think about a previous advertisement, where there are fundamental truths about our game of football that still haven't changed through time and technology.
Run the ball.
One of those things is physicality is always going to win in football. Speed will not win out. And look, the Golden State Warriors, the reason that they were so crazy to watch when they were really popping off there, 10 years ago, is because the live by the 3, die by the 3 thing, they finally lived by the 3. We finally saw a team live by the 3 and actually be able to play that.
They have the volume to do that because it's basketball. You've got 80 games. You can have an off day.
You can't do that in football. You cannot do that. And the Dolphins try to live by the 3, and you can't do it in football because physicality always wins over speed in football. And at the end of the day, in the NFL, at least, I will say, in college, it might be a different story. But in the NFL, that physicality will always win. And the Dolphins aren't built to be a physical team. They're built to be a speed team. And that's why they're a regular season demon when they're good. And I also want to say that the cool guy act never works. The cool coach who's kind of like the players, and I make weird, quirky statements.
Oh, man, you're not in the NFC North.
I'm cool. And that
we got 3 of those in the NFC North, and they're all in the playoffs.
No. None of those guys are like Mike McDaniel. He's like a Cliff Kingsbury type of act. Okay. Dan Campbell is like hard-nosed, down-to-earth, genuine guy. You look around at the coaches who's the only cool guy who's really Sean McVay. And I think even Sean McVay is more of
it's like beach vibes all the way.
Yeah, it's more of like a dip spit. I just love football kind of guy than some of his predecessors or some of the guys who came after him. So I'm sorry, but the cool guy act, the speed team, all of that, nope, it's not going to work in the NFL. I've never believed in the Dolphins.
I do not believe in the Dolphins at all. I think that they are more finesse. They're a little more sizzle than steak, and I think that does get exposed either when they travel and the weather gets to them, and that's kind of the narrative. But I also think there's something a little more fundamental to it, that it just eventually teams get tape on you, and they're smarter than that. Safeties just drop, and suddenly I don't care how deep Tyreek Hill is. Your safety's 30 yards deep, and if you don't have the run game counter punches to beat that, which the Dolphins haven't had what you think that they should with the schematic, mastery that Mike McDaniel is known for. I don't know. I just don't really believe that going 9-8, 11-6, and then 8-9. I think those are the last 3 years, and then saying let's buy into a fourth of it. Surely we'll get lucky this time. Like, there's something more fundamentally wrong with you. There's something deeper that needs to be fixed, and I would have loved to see them not fire everybody, not break the whole thing down. There are elements of this that absolutely work, but I want to see them try to strive for some kind of adjustment that takes them to that next level, that makes them the kind of team that can compete with the Bills that have now won the AFC East 4 years running and don't look like they're slowing down anytime soon.
Well, it's too late because they gave Tua $250 million. So
that might be the issue.
That's you're never getting far with that. It's the problem is that quarterbacks like Tua, and there are a million of them in the NFL. Well, not a million, but the majority of starting quarterbacks in the NFL are Tua level players. Maybe not quite as good as Tua, but what it means for your team and roster building, it means the same. It's like the Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence, and maybe the Green Bay Packers with Jordan Love, and the 49ers once they pay Brock Purdy. You can't let them go because it could be worse, but they're not good enough to get paid that much and have a good enough team around them to be a good enough team. So
let Cleveland be a cautionary tale.
Yeah, the Dolphins are just stuck in that wave, and there's nothing they can do, and it's even worse because they're not good enough to win in cold weather, which is where the important football is played. But with that being said, it's been a negative, dark episode of Locked On NFL. People are getting fired, and if they didn't get fired, they should have got fired, and that is going to do it for me and Luke today. I am your host, the Madman, the Brain, Luke Braun. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Playoff talk tomorrow. Time to get into the games that are going to be played this weekend. But make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed to Locked On NFL. As I tell you every episode, stay safe out there.